Hi, so here is the story. I recently migrated a huge Vue 2 application into Vue 3, and then I realized that most of my team members, they don't have that much experience with Vue 3. I told them that it's absolutely fine because it's so easy to understand Vue 3, especially if you really experienced Vue 2 developer. So my goal is to make you feel really comfortable about Vue 3 after watching this video. So what you need to understand that Vue 3 is a natural evolution from Vue 2. That's why I can simplify the whole explanation in showing you just two core things about Vue 3. The first thing is the composition API with a single file component syntax sugar. It's also known as a script setup. And the second thing is Composables, which is technically a product of the composition API. So technically we're learning just one thing. So let's go into learning the composition API. So here I have an example application of Vue 3, and I have a really basic component which shows the welcome message, sub message. I have a click event, and I have the other component imported here and used. So as you can see, even though this is a Vue 3 application, but we have a component used with the options API. And the options API is the Vue 2 thing. Thanks to the Vue team, they didn't break Vue 2 syntax. They extended options API with the composition API, and they allow us to use composition API on its own or in combination with options API, also known as a Vue 2 syntax. So in order to use composition API, we need to use a new setup hook. The setup hook is the thing that will be run first. So it will be run before mounted, before anything. It will first run this code and then will continue running everything else, which is great because we can use this in combination. Let's basically convert this component's options API into using just setup hook with the composition API. So first of all, as you can see, we have certain data. We have submessage. Submessage is used in here in the template. So what I will do first, I will actually just remove data. And as you can see, as soon as I do this, my editor no longer sees this variable. Technically, submessage is just a variable. So what we can do, we can create a new variable called submessage. And what I can do is I can export data that I want to be exposed into the template from the setup hook. And I do this by using return keyword, and I actually just export whatever I need to export. In this case, I export the submessage variable. And as soon as I do this, as you can see, my editor now can see submessage. So it will be rendered correctly. If I comment out this thing, it will not be visible. By the way, we can remove this. So we migrated data into setup hook, into composition API. The second thing, we have methods. Method is used here for click button. So method technically is just a function. So we can remove this. We can create a function. We call it on button click, and then we just export this function. As soon as we do this, this button click works. So next we have computed. Computed is basically a function. So we can actually remove this. In order to create a computed in composition API, we import the computed function from Vue. I'm editing my video right now and I realize that I'm really stupid. I say all the time that I import something from Vue, but I type for some reason export. I don't know why this happens, probably because I record my first video and I do the screen capture at the same time, but please don't judge me. Well, you can judge me, but remember that I import everything from Vue, not exporting from Vue. And because I really struggle with using my brain, I realized this mistake only at the end of this video. Okay, enjoy the rest of the video. We import the computed function from Vue, and this computed function can be used in here in order to make this value as a computed. We can simplify this code to be one line because we need to return this. As you can see, we use prop called name from here, but in composition API, we don't use this keyword at all. So we need somehow to get access to the props. In order to use props, we need to pass a parameter in the setup hook called props. And now we can use props like that, and it will work correctly. Then we need to export this computed value into our template. Here, as you can see, we can remove this, and then we got left with these two component lifecycle hooks. We can also use them inside of our composition API. In order to do this, mounted called onMounted. we can import this, and we simply use this as a regular function that takes callback. And the callback is whatever we want to run inside of the mounted hook. In our case, it's just a console log. So we can remove this mounted hook from here. And lastly, you need to use on before mount instead of before on mount. So we type this, we add on, and we use this directly here, just like with on-mounted hook. And we have the following code in the before on-mount code. We just type it here. And as you can see, we need to convert this keyword into something. And this something is actually a sub-message variable, which is here, which is a direct thing from our setup hook. Obviously, if you have watchers, you can actually use watch just like with the computed value. Let's say you want to watch a prop value change. You can type watch and then you type props name, and then you have a callback that will be run on every prop name change, and you can do something. As you can see, Composition API is really intuitive and it's really easy to use. However, Vue team created single file component syntax sugar that is actually much better to use with the Composition API than this sort of kind of Frankenstein setup with the Options API. Let me show you how you can use this single file component syntax sugar, also known as a script setup. The convention is to use script above the template. You just type script setup. So this will be the scope of our component, and whatever you type there appears in your template. Let's say here in the setup script, whatever I create, I need to export with a return here in order to make it appear in our template. In the script setup, we actually just use this variable as a regular one, and it will be visible to our template. So if I remove this, it should just still work. Then for the function is the same. We take this function, we move it here, and that's it. It will be visible to our template. And then we can take our computed value, we create it here, and it's visible to our template immediately. Then we can move our remaining things on mounted and on before and mount, and this will work as it should. So here we can entirely remove our setup hook, and we need to import all these APIs in our setup hook. And we don't use watch anymore. So we got left a few more things. So in order to import any other components, we just need to import them in our setup hook like that. And we don't need to declare them anymore, which is beautiful. Technically, import other component is a variable that is translated into the component here. And finally, we need to somehow import the prop. So we can actually remove this, get this code with the props. And in order to register our props, we need to use a thing called define props, which is a new Vue 3 API. We need to import this like that. And in here, it's pretty much the same syntax as you would use in Vue 2. It's just like that. And also we can set it to be equal to prop. So we define props like that, and we can use this variable inside of our JavaScript file. And we can use this in our template in two ways. First, we can use props name, and also it's allowed to use directly because Vue will do this simplification for us by dropping the props. So you can technically define props like that, and you can still use it in the template. At this example, you can see how nice and easy you can use new Vue 3 Composition API, especially with the script setup syntax sugar. Everything becomes really natural and intuitive. So technically, this is everything you need to know about Vue 3. However, this Composition API allows us to abstract code in a really nice new way. This is the second really important thing called Composables. In order to understand Composables, I need to go with you and convert this another component from the Options API into the script setup. And I hope this is going to be really useful. So we have a really simple component here. We have two things. We display and load some user, and then we display it if it's loaded. And then we have user settings, which is also loaded on click. And then we just display whatever user settings. So technically, you need to know we have inside of this component, we have two features. Let's say feature A, it's loading and showing user, and the feature B, which is loading and showing user settings. So we have per each feature, we have a method, we have methods 2, we have computed for feature 1 for the user, and we have data for both things. And we have the mountain hook, which actually contains the fetch user by ID function. So let's rewrite this. As you remember, we type script, we need to type setup. So first I would actually migrate props into define props. And we need to import this from view. So here we have two functions. Let's move them as well. So we move to functions, we can remove props now, we can remove methods now. We got left the computed value. Let's move that one as well. Don't forget we need to import computed here. Then we need to move data. We just take this. We don't have any watch here. We have data. So data is technically just a bunch of variables. So we have variables here. We have each variable should be something like that. We have for each feature for the user, we have user is loading and we have user fetch error, and we have the same for the is user setting loading, user settings and user settings fetch error. This is pretty simple and we need to fix this. We can simplify this computed value and we got left the mounted hook here. We can also take that and we can remove the legacy script entirely. And then we just import our mounted hook. We call it on mounted. And this is a function that takes the argument and it's a callback. And here we just moved most of the code. However, it still has some issues. We need to import here on mounted hook. Then as you can see, I have lots of this keyword. This is no longer needed because we have fetch user by ID function. We just remove and we use this as a regular function in JavaScript. Then I have this user ID, which is my component prop. I will just replace that with props, user ID. First of all, I have this keyword here, which is this user, and the user is my local variable that will contain user when it's fetched. So I use just the variable directly. So next is user loading. I just have a variable. Then I need to check if I use this anywhere else. Yes, I use this here. Then I have user fetch error, which is also just a variable. And then I have user, which will contain whatever data is fetched from the server. And I need to do the same for my second function. And I just will go through all these keywords and we'll remove them. As you can see, we fully migrated into the script setup syntax. However, we have a few red things. That's why we need to learn about new reactivity in Vue. So the thing here is really simple. So this is just a variable and it's a const. Technically, I could use let, and in this case, the error would be gone. However, this variable would not be reactive. So when I apply false or true, this variable would not reflect changes in my template. Because as soon as I load the application, the default value is false. So my template will stuck in this state when it's loading the user. However, on mounted, I fetch the user, and after some time when the server responds with the data, I apply the user with the new data, and then I set this hook to false. After the user is loaded, this if condition will disappear and this else condition would appear in the template in my application. So in order to do this, I need to make this variable back to const or whatever you use. You can use let as well. And I need to use a new thing called ref. So I use ref function. I need to import this from the Vue API. And technically what I do by using ref is I say that this variable is no longer just a regular JavaScript variable, but it's a reactive Vue variable. So when you create a ref, it's a reactive value, which starts with whatever initial value you set in here. And this variable has dot value property. And in order to apply a new value to your reactive variable, you need to use dot value. So in this case, I do this. Now, if I need to update this value, this reactive value, I use this dot value, and then I apply whatever value I want to apply. And in order to make my application work, I need to do the same for other places. And user is used not only to rewrite the value, let's say here, I need to do user dot value JSON, but here I need to do dot value, and then I can use the value like that. So here it's a really important thing. Inside of the JavaScript, you use user.value and dot whatever the child properties of this object that you set at some point. However, inside of the template, Vue will drop dot value and will allow you to use an object properties directly without user.value. This is not needed inside of the template. So let me migrate the remaining stuff. The same for the error. So the error also reactive, and I have have this here. I need to do dot value. And I need to do the same for this one, for this one, and for these two. And I need to convert these variables into refs. So in here, get user settings, which is a function called from here, I just realized that I have user.id. So in order to make it work, I can use this user.value, or I can actually do something like props because I have this inside of the prop, or I can just pass it from here by using this code without user.value.id, because I use this function from the template and the template drops the dot value. And I would say reactivity in Vue is simple, but it's probably required a separate video for that. But as a starting point, I recommend you to read Vue.js official documentation about the reactivity fundamentals. So it's really straight to the point and it's really easy to understand. Oh yeah, and by the way, don't hesitate to leave comments if you want to know more about reactivity or any other Vue free features. So let's get back to Composables. So technically what is going on here, we converted into this script setup syntax, and you can see that we have two features. We have a feature about user and we have a feature about the Vue user settings. So technically we can keep everything like that, but because we have a composition API, we can move our code around and group this code how we want to. So we have this here and we have this user welcome computed, which also belong to our user subfeature of the component. So as you can see, we have two logical entities in the component. So we have the user related code and we have the user settings related code. So technically, you can encapsulate this into the function. Let's create a function called useUser. And inside of this function, we will move all our subfeature. And below we will create a function called useUserSettings. So we will move everything related to that inside. As you can see, we have now the code that actually can be sort of kind of abstracted into sub entities. And we can here export everything, just like in the composition API that I showed you before, everything that we want to use in our template. In our case, we want to use welcome message. We want to use fetch user by ID because it's used here, and the user message is used in our template. And also we need to use user in some places. And do we use is user loading? Yes, we're using it. So we actually export this, and we also use fetch error to display the error here. So we export all these variables that we want to use in our template or in our component. So what you can do, you can actually call this function and make it equal to destructed object, which will contain all these variables. And these variables will be exposed to our template and to our component JavaScript. And we can do the same for the other feature. So here we can export everything that we want to export. So we want to export pretty much everything because we will use most of these things. So here we just do the same as we did with the user. We just call user settings and it equal to whatever we want to export from here. And as you can probably now realize that if we just collapse these two things, we can move this one below. And these two functions technically fully encapsulated and they can fully be used independently. And what it means that we can move these things into a separate file or into multiple separate files. We can create a file called user services and we can simply move our functions from here, from our component into here, and we can export them so we can later use them. We export function about the user and we can export the function for the user settings. So we can do this and this. And then in our components, we are missing use user and use user settings. What we can do, we can simply import this code in here. And I just realized that I have export instead of import. Sorry about that. I've imported these two composables in my component and I use these two composables directly. And as a result here, when I use user settings, I export this fetch error here. but I don't use this anyway in the component, so I can just drop this. Now I see that computed is no longer used in this component, and the same for the ref. If I go here, I can see that the computed needs to be imported here from view, and the same for the ref. So now this file is fully encapsulated. If I want to, I can create a separate file per each composable. And as you can see, this is the way I actually abstracted my user feature and the user settings feature into the composables, and I place that in the user service file. So as you can see, I actually have here the unmounted hook, which belongs to this component. The great thing about composables that you can actually move this hook into the actual composable that it belongs to. In my case, this is the use user. I can do this, and the only thing I need to do, I need to pass the props here. I need to import props here, and I can remove this fetch user by ID because it will happen automatically. This is the beauty of script setup and the composables, so I can encapsulate sub features of the component into the standalone composables, and I can use any component lifecycle hook inside of the composables. And I can use refs, I can use watch, computed, anything. I really recommend to read official documentation because it's really easy to understand and they have really great examples. I really hope that everything makes sense. And in case you're wondering how to use View Composition API for certain features like a V-model, let's say, you can just go to the official documentation, type V-model, open that, and there is a switch between Options API and the Composition API. If you switch to Options API, you will see export default with the props and mids and everything. And this is how you get used to use View API. However, if you switch to the Composition API, you will see that in order to use vModel, you can use the latest feature called Define Model that will allow to achieve the same thing, but with a Composition API. I really hope this video was useful, and don't hesitate to leave any comments, any questions you have, so I'll try to answer all of them. Have a nice day. Bye.